So when we try to envision a fortress, I think the mind instantly constructs something, very physical, something imposing.
Right, like massive dressed stone walls.
Yeah, exactly. Deep trenches, maybe iron portcullises, a garrison of armed guards.
All the classic medieval stuff.
Right. We think of architecture that's explicitly designed to keep the chaos and the unpredictability of the outside world, well, firmly on the outside.
It's a comforting image, because it's tangible.
It is. You figure you build the walls thick enough, and theoretically you're safe from whatever invading army is out there. But history actually shows us that physical fortresses inevitably fall.
They always do. They get starved out or, betrayed from
We're
within.
just battered into submission.
Yeah.
But the most impenetrable fortress ever constructed in human history didn't actually rely on a single stone.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. It was a psychological citadel. And the architect of the citadel was a man who was, legally speaking, classified as property. We're talking today about Epictetus, a man whose physical body was entirely at the mercy of a sadistic master in the profoundly paranoid and blood-soaked court of the Roman Emperor Nero.
Which just entirely subverts our human concept of security. Think about the environment he had to navigate.
It was a nightmare.
Total nightmare. In Nero's Rome, senators, generals, the aristocrats, they all lived in a constant state of terror. A wrong word, a misunderstood glance, or honestly just having too much wealth could result in an imperial order to open your veins.
Yeah, these were the most powerful people on earth, and yet they were psychological slaves to their circumstances.
Exactly. And navigating the very bottom of this hierarchy is Epictetus, a man with a crippled leg owned by Epictetus.
Who was a scary guy in his own right.
Oh, absolutely. He was a freedman and a high-ranking bureaucratic enforcer for Nero. Yet, out of that crucible of absolute physical vulnerability, Epictetus constructs this internal citadel, one that simply cannot be breached by exile or torture or the whims of a tyrant.
And the beautiful thing is, the architect of that citadel left us the blueprints, the Discourses and the Enchiridion.
Or the manual, as it's sometimes called.
Right. But what elevates this beyond just a standard historical deep dive into, Stoic logic is the bizarre and brilliant afterlife of his teachings.
Yeah, this is the part that fascinates me the most.
Because we aren't just looking at the intellectual exercises of a pagan philosopher here. We are looking at a text that was considered so lethal to the human ego, so perfectly engineered for inner purity, that early Christian ascetics essentially claimed him as their own.
They really did. They looked at Epictetus and saw what they called an anima naturaliter Christiana.
A naturally Christian soul.
Yeah. And the transmission of his work is just one of the most fascinating phenomena in theological history. You have the monks of the Eastern Orthodox Church, specifically in places like Mount Athos and St. Catherine's Monastery.
Out in the Sinai Peninsula.
Exactly. These were men who fled the corruption of the cities to wage just absolute unrestricted warfare against their own inner demons in the deep desert.
And what did they use as their tactical manual?
A slightly edited version of Epictetus's Enchiridion.
It's incredible. They literally took his handbook, swapped out the name of Socrates for St. Paul, replaced references to the Roman pantheon with God, and just utilized it for centuries as a foundational ascetic rulebook.
Because they recognized that the mechanics of the human mind, they don't really change based on your theology.
Right. So for the duration of this deep dive, we are going to treat the philosophy of Epictetus exactly as those ancient desert monks did.
I love this approach.
Yeah, not as an abstract curiosity to be, analyzed and then left on a dusty shelf. We're looking at it as a visceral, active form of spiritual training.
Right, because it requires a massive shift in how we process information.
We're going to look at how to build those internal walls, how to guard the gates against intrusive thoughts, how to endure the grueling winter training of the passions, and ultimately how to transmute the inescapable suffering of life into something triumphant.
And like I said, this isn't passive absorption. The desert monks read these texts to locate the blade and then immediately apply it to their own psychological flesh.
Yeah.
If we're treating this as a manual for inner transformation, we have to demand of ourselves what Epictetus demanded of his students, which is just absolute, unsparing intellectual honesty.
So let's start with the foundation. Before you can begin any spiritual training, you must define the precise boundaries of your sanctuary.
You can't protect a fortress if you don't know where the walls are.
Exactly. And if you draw the walls too wide, attempting to enclose territory that doesn't actually belong to you, You will spend your entire life exhausted.
Just rushing to defend borders that are entirely indefensible.
Right. Which brings us to the bedrock of Epictetus's entire worldview, proheresis.
The sphere of choice.
Yes.
And proheresis is often translated simply as will or moral choice, but honestly, that doesn't quite capture the gravity of the Greek concept.
It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. For Epictetus, this isn't just a function of the mind. It is the core of human identity. It's the rational faculty that observes, evaluates, and chooses.
The thing that separates us from animals.
Exactly. And more importantly, it's the only thing in the universe that is truly ours. The very first line of the Enchiridion draws this line in the sand that is terrifying in its absoluteness.
We are responsible for some things, while there are others for which we cannot be held responsible.
Right. He tells us that what belongs to us are our internal mental operations, our judgments, impulses, desires, and our aversions.
And everything else, our bodies, our bank accounts, reputations, social status, the economy, the political landscape, all of that is external and therefore not our affair.
None of your business, basically.
Now, I have to challenge this immediately because the modern mind completely rebels against this division.
Oh, for sure, especially the body part.
Right, like we can somewhat accept that the economy is out of our control, but our bodies, if I eat well, exercise, sleep right, I am controlling my body. To tell someone facing a chronic illness that their body is not theirs seems, I don't know, fundamentally dismissive.
It sounds incredibly abrasive because we are so deeply entangled with our physical avatars. But Epictetus is operating on a timeline of eternity and necessity.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Yes, you can influence your body, you can eat kale, you can run marathons, but can you guarantee that a microscopic rogue cell won't multiply into a tumor tomorrow?
Well, no.
Can you guarantee a drunk driver won't cross the median on your way home? You have influence, but you do not have sovereignty. And for Epictetus, if you do not have absolute, unhindered sovereignty over a thing, it is fundamentally a mistake to claim ownership of it.
That distinction between influence and sovereignty is huge, and he illustrates this beautifully and honestly, somewhat humorously, with an imagined dialogue with Zeus.
Right, the cunningly constructed clay.
Yes. He writes that God could not make our physical bodies entirely free, because we're bound to a material world governed by physics, biology, the sheer randomness of the cosmos. Our clay will always be subject to the elements.
Right, so since Zeus couldn't make our bodies perfectly free, he gave us a fragment of his own divine nature instead. He gave humanity the power of positive and negative impulse.
The faculty of choice.
Exactly. The divine voice tells Epictetus, if you take care of it and identify with it, you will never be blocked or frustrated. You won't have to complain and never will need to blame or flatter anyone.
It's the great trade-off of human existence. You get this frail, temporary, highly vulnerable, physical vessel, but embedded right inside it is an invincible divine spark of rational choice.
And the tragedy is that we spend like 99% of our energy agonizing over the clay and almost zero energy cultivating the spark.
Think about the analogy he uses regarding the weather. I find it so painfully applicable today.
The sailors at port.
Yeah. He points out how ridiculous people are when they're delayed at port. They sit down, they fret, they stare at the sky, and they constantly ask the sailors, which way's the wind blowing?
From the north.
Right, and the traveler groans, that's no good. When will it blow from the west? And Epictetus delivers this incredibly dry punchline. When it wants to, or rather, when Aeolus wants it to. Because God put Aeolus in charge of the winds, not you.
It's brilliant because it highlights the absurdity of our anxiety. The wind doesn't care about your travel itinerary. The universe does not bend to your schedule.
No, it doesn't.
Yet we allow our internal weather, our mood, our peace, our psychological stability to be entirely dictated by the external wind.
If we modernize the analogy, it's like spending your day obsessing over an algorithm.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. We stare at our screens, watching the cultural or political winds blow, constantly asking, why is this trending? Why are people angry about this? Why isn't my project getting traction? We are mentally fighting the wind.
We're trying to garrison a fortress that exists completely outside our sphere of choice. And when you attempt to garrison territory you don't own, you inevitably spread your forces too thin.
Leaving your actual citadel completely undefended.
Exactly. If you place your sense of well-being in your reputation or your career trajectory or even your physical health, you're literally handing the keys to your internal fortress over to a total stranger.
You're saying, my happiness now requires the cooperation of 8 billion other people, the economy, and cellular biology.
And it is a mathematical certainty that you will be crushed.
So, if we distill this down to the core principle of inner discipline, it begins with drawing an absolute, impermeable, ruthlessly guarded boundary around your will.
You cut off the passion of anxiety at its very root.
By forcing yourself to accept that external outcomes are fundamentally irrelevant to your core character.
And that is precisely why the Desert Fathers resonated so deeply with this text. This Stoic delineation of the will perfectly mirrors the monastic concept of nepsis.
Nepsis, which translates to watchfulness or sobriety over the heart.
Right? It's the literalization of the concept. I mean, why did the monks retreat to the physical desert of Citadel or the caves of Cappadocia?
They didn't do it because the scenery was nice.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
They went to the most barren, inhospitable places on earth to deliberately strip away the externals. They removed the wealth, the social status, the political maneuvering of the church and the cities.
The comfortable food, the soft clothing.
Right. They systematically stripped away the cunningly constructed clay's comforts so they could wage war strictly and exclusively on the battlefield of the will.
They engineered an environment where they couldn't blame their environment.
Exactly. If you're sitting alone in a cave for 5 years and you feel a surge of bitter anger, you can't blame it on your neighbor or your boss. You are forced to confront the fact that the anger is generating from within the sphere of choice.
You're forced to realize the call is coming from inside the house. But if we are looking at this synthesis of Stoicism and early Christian asceticism, we do have to acknowledge a profound, fundamental point of divergence.
Right, the Pascal critique.
Yes. The 17th century philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote brilliantly about this. He deeply admired Epictetus, praised him for his clear-eyed understanding of human duties.
But he pointed out a massive philosophical blind spot from a Christian perspective. Pascal's critique really cuts to the heart of human capability, because Epictetus operates under the assumption that human nature is perfectible by our own unassisted reason.
If you just train your mind hard enough, you can achieve perfect tranquility by your own strength. You are your own savior.
Right. And Pascal, speaking for the Christian ascetic tradition, says, no, human willpower is fundamentally fractured. The fortress walls are compromised from birth.
So the monk believes that while we must fight with every ounce of our strength, true mastery over the passions requires the intervention of divine grace.
The Stoic relies on the fortress of his own mind. The Christian ascetic relies on the grace of God to reinforce a fortress they know is built on cracked foundations. It's the difference between supreme self-reliance and supreme humility.
But practically speaking, in the trenches of daily life, both traditions utilize the exact same mechanism to begin the work. You must first identify what is yours to control.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the challenge for you, the listener. Because if we are treating this as a spiritual training manual, understanding the theory of the will isn't enough. You have to put it into practice.
You have to actually do it.
Today, when you encounter your first significant frustration, maybe someone cuts you off in traffic, maybe an email arrives that threatens a project you care about, you need to utilize the boundary. Say silently to that frustration. An impression is all you are, not the source of the impression.
And then ask the diagnostic question, is this in my control?
And if it falls even 1 millimeter outside your absolute sovereignty, you must immediately reply, then it is none of my concern.
It will feel unnatural. I mean, your brain will scream that it is your concern because you care about it.
But caring about the weather doesn't give you control over the wind.
Exactly. You have to sever the emotional attachment to the uncontrollable variable.
So as you navigate that today, here's a question to meditate on, to carry with you like a stone in your shoe. What external fragile thing are you currently treating as if you actually control it?
Oh, that's a good one.
And how much heavy, exhausting, completely unnecessary armor are you wearing to protect a piece of territory that the universe can and eventually will take back?
That really requires auditing your anxieties. Usually the thing you are most stressed about today is the exact territory you need to surrender.
Okay, let's pivot to the mechanics of defending this territory. We've drawn these absolute walls around our will, but that naturally raises a critical vulnerability. The gates. The outside world doesn't usually lay siege to us. It smuggles anxiety past the walls through what Epictetus calls impressions. If we want to maintain the sanctuary, we have to learn how to interrogate the things that knock on our door.
And the theory of impressions is perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated element of ancient philosophy. An impression fantasia in Greek is essentially any stimulus that strikes the mind and demands our belief or our reaction.
It can be sensory, like seeing a terrifying animal.
Or entirely mental, A memory of a past embarrassment bubbles up, or a hypothetical fear about tomorrow's presentation flashes through your brain.
And the mind's default setting, evolved over millions of years to keep us alive, is to instantly categorize these impressions. We engage in what Epictetus identifies as the supreme danger, premature assent.
Right. We see a stimulus and our mind automatically frames it as a statement of objective reality.
We see someone weeping at a funeral, and the mind instantaneously generates the judgment. Death is a terrible evil, and this is a tragedy. Or we see a billionaire stepping off a private jet, and the mind judges. Wealth is a supreme good, and that person is incredibly lucky.
But Epictetus stops the tape right there. He argues that it is these automatic, deeply conditioned opinions, not the events themselves, that cause all of our grief, our paralyzing fear, our envy.
The event is completely neutral.
Exactly. The billionaire on the jet is simply an arrangement of atoms, a mortal human moving from one geographical location to another. The mourning at the funeral is simply a human experiencing the natural biological cycle of mortality.
It is our judgment that forcibly attaches the label of good or bad to the neutral event.
And this insight is so staggeringly accurate that modern psychology basically stole it and built an empire on it.
Right. Albert Ellis and REBT.
Yeah, rational mode behavior therapy. Ellis was completely transparent about his theft. He read chapter 5 of the Enchiridion, which says, "It is not events that disturb people, it is their judgments concerning them." And he realized that much of what we experience as overwhelming emotion is actually just a strongly evaluative kind of thought.
The ABC model.
Yes, A is the activating event, B is the belief or judgment about the event, C is the consequence, the emotional reaction. We always think A causes C. I got fired, therefore I am depressed.
But Epictetus and Ellis say no, you got fired, that's A. You hold the deeply ingrained belief that your worth is tied to your job, that's B.
And that belief is what generates the depression, which is C, change B, change C.
The theory makes perfect sense, but the practice is incredibly elusive because these judgments happen in milliseconds. The amygdala hijack occurs before the prefrontal cortex even boots up.
Yeah, it's fast.
How do we actually catch these automatic judgments before they breach the gates?
Well, Epictetus provides a masterclass analogy here involving the money changer. Because in antiquity, coinage was regularly clipped or shaved or outright forged. A merchant couldn't afford to take money at face value. They had to become expert assayers.
The sensory detail he uses here is brilliant.
It really is. He describes how an assayer doesn't just look at a denarius. He drops it on a stone table and listens to the ring.
Because pure silver has a specific resonance.
Exactly. And a counterfeit coin made of lead or mixed alloys just lands with a dull thud. The assayer listens to the drop over and over, thousands of times, until he develops a musician's subtle ear for a fake.
Okay, so if we are the assayers of our own consciousness, how do we develop that ear for counterfeit thoughts? Because frankly, it sounds utterly exhausting.
Always.
If I have to interrogate every single thought that crosses my mind, I'm never going to get any work done. I'm going to be paralyzed by cognitive overload.
It is exhausting at first, which is why it requires training. But the mechanism Epictetus demands is the creation of a micropause. He gives us the exact protocol. He says, don't let the force of an impression when it first hits you knock you off your feet. Just say to it, hold on a moment. Let me see who you are and what you represent. Let me put you to the test.
You act as the vigilant, somewhat cynical gatekeeper.
You demand that the thought prove its identity.
Think about it like a psychological spam filter. When an impression hits, let's say you see a colleague get promoted over you, the initial impression is going to scream, this is an outrage, I am a victim.
Right.
You had to stop the thought at the gate and say, hold on, is this promotion an internal good of my character or an external good of circumstance?
And it's external. Therefore, it is a counterfeit coin.
It has no actual bearing on my ability to be virtuous or patient or kind today. You drop the coin, hear the dull thud, and toss it out.
By creating that micropause, you're neurologically interrupting the automatic pathway between stimulus and reaction. Because passions thrive exclusively in the dark. They thrive in the absence of scrutiny.
The moment you force an irrational fear to articulate itself clearly under the harsh light of reason, it begins to disintegrate.
Exactly. And this concept of vigilant interrogation bridges seamlessly into the practices of the Desert Fathers and their war against logismoi.
Oh, this is one of my favorite aspects of monastic psychology, logismoi.
It's the Greek monastic term for intrusive, passionate thoughts. The monks understood that the demon of anger or the demon of despair, almost never starts with a dramatic physical temptation. It arrives as a whisper.
It starts as a subtle, almost reasonable-sounding impression. The monk sits alone in his cell and a thought enters. You have been out here for 10 years and no one even knows your name. Your brother back in Alexandria is wealthy and respected.
And if the monk assents to that thought, if he agrees with the premise that worldly respect is a good, the seed of despair is planted.
So the ascetic practice is to sit at the door of the heart and interrogate every single logismoi. They refuse to let the thought cross the threshold uncontested.
And there is a profound, crushing lesson in personal responsibility here. We live in a culture that loves to externalize blame. That person made me angry. The news made me anxious.
Epictetus says, absolutely not. He says, when someone provokes you, realize that your own mind is complicit in the provocation.
If someone insults you and you get angry, it is only because you have secretly assented to the belief that their opinion of you actually matters.
That is the essence of true, radical humility. You stop pointing the finger at the outside world. You realize that your own unexamined, sloppy judgments are the saboteurs inside the gates.
It strips away all your excuses.
Yeah.
And once the excuses are gone, the real work can begin.
Which brings us to the practical challenge for you, the listener, regarding the discipline of assent. Tomorrow, or even later today, your goal is to subject the impressions you encounter to the assayer's table. Yes. When you're scrolling through social media and you see an outrage bait headline designed to hijack your amygdala, test it. Ask yourself, does this geopolitical event, which I cannot control, have any bearing on my moral character in this specific moment?
And when it rings false, dismiss it. If you see a beautifully curated photo of someone's vacation and feel a twinge of envy, pause. Ask, is this a good of the mind or just a trick of matter and circumstance?
Reject the counterfeit coins immediately. Do not let them pass the gate.
It requires relentless, exhausting vigilance. But neuroplasticity is real. Your ear will become more attuned over time.
And the meditative question to reflect on for this section. When was the last time you let the absolute force of a completely counterfeit impression, a misread tone in an email, a hypothetical scenario that never happened, dictate your mood and your physiological state for an entire day?
We've all lost days to completely fabricated realities because we didn't check the coin.
We really have. Okay, now we have to move deeper into the fortress. Guarding the gates against stray, incoming thoughts is vital. But what about the enemies that are already living inside?
The entrenched habits.
Right. The deeply grooved neural pathways of anger or addiction or anxiety that have bypassed our defenses for decades. Observation and micropauses aren't enough here. We must move from observation to active, grueling combat.
What Epictetus refers to as the winter training.
Exactly.
This is where Epictetus ceases to be just a philosopher of the mind and becomes a behavioral psychologist of the highest order. He understands that intellectual understanding is practically useless in the face of an entrenched habit.
Every habit is formed and strengthened by the corresponding act. Basic conditioning.
Right. Walking makes you walk better. Running makes you a better runner. And, critically, tragically, this applies identically to our moral failures.
The language he uses in the text is incredibly visceral. He says that every time you get angry, you haven't just had an isolated lapse in judgment. You have actively encouraged a trend. You've thrown gasoline on a fire.
And he says that indulging in the passion leaves a literal blister on the soul. He compares it to contracting a severe illness, like a violent fever. Even if you survive the acute phase, you aren't the same. Your system is weakened.
Unless the recovery is absolute and complete. If you give in to a burst of rage and you don't aggressively invoke reason to counteract it, the neural pathways are reinforced.
The next time you're provoked, you'll yield more quickly. The blister becomes an open, festering wound that eventually becomes your permanent character.
So we can't just philosophize these passions away. We have to engage in the winter training. We have to cultivate opposed habits.
Because a habit can only be broken by an equally powerful counter-habit. You have to endure the agonizing discomfort of active, sustained resistance. It's like trying to row a boat upstream after drifting downstream for 20 years.
I want to highlight the athlete analogy Epictetus uses because it just completely eviscerates how modern society approaches self-improvement.
Oh, this is so good.
Epictetus is dealing with students who love to brag about reading complex philosophical treatises. They boast about how much they understand Chrysippus, the founding father of Stoic logic.
And Epictetus basically mocks them to their faces. He says, it's as if I were to say to an athlete, show me your shoulders. And he responded with, Have a look at my weights.
Get out of here with your gigantic weights. Your weights are useless if your muscles have atrophied.
Right. I want to see how you've profited from the weights. I want to see the shoulders.
And this applies perfectly to us today. We have entire industries built on weights. We read 100 books a year on productivity. We listen to endless deep dives on mental health. We memorize quotes.
We are absolute junkies for the weights.
Yes. But when the barista gets our order wrong, we snap at them. When our spouse gives us a weird look, we spiral into defensive rage. Why are we so addicted to the weights while completely neglecting the shoulders of actual moral endurance?
Well, because lifting the weights in the theoretical sense is easy. It gives us a dopamine hit. Buying a new book on self-improvement makes us feel like we have already improved,
It satisfies the ego.
without demanding any actual sacrifice. But building the shoulders, that requires suppressing the ego in real time. When someone insults you, your biology screams for retaliation. Applying the philosophy in that moment requires agonizing effort. It feels like a kind of death.
So the core principle here is undeniable. Inner peace is not an intellectual concept to be memorized. It is a callus that must be built.
It's a muscle that must be broken down and rebuilt through continuous friction-heavy resistance to vice.
Habit is only broken by counter-habit. Every single moment of restraint slightly weakens the disease of the passion. There are no neutral moments in the moral life. You are always either building the blister or healing it.
And this brings us back to the desert. This concept of winter training is the very essence of ascesis.
The Greek root for asceticism.
Right, which simply means training or exercise, specifically the training of an athlete preparing for the games.
When modern people think of asceticism, we usually picture a morbid obsession with suffering. Monks starving themselves, wearing hair shirts just to be miserable.
Because they hate the body.
Right, but that is a complete misunderstanding. The Desert Fathers engaged in physical and mental austerities not to arbitrarily punish the body, but to heal the soul's blisters.
They were applying the opposed habit. If a monk found himself plagued by gluttony, he didn't just read a scroll about temperance. He restricted his food to break the tyranny of the physical appetite over the will. It was chemotherapy for the soul.
The austerity was the medicine, calibrated to the specific disease. And the parallels in methodology are incredibly literal. Epictetus gives his students a shockingly practical protocol. He says, suppress the first impulse to be angry, then begin to count the days on which you don't get mad. If you resisted a whole month, offer God a sacrifice.
He's gamifying moral progress. And monasticism places the exact same emphasis on small, daily incremental victories over the passions. They kept tally.
So listener, your challenge for the winter training is not to read another book. Your challenge is to build the callus. Identify your most frequent entrenched vice. Maybe it is complaining about the weather. Maybe it is snapping at your kids when you're tired.
Or participating in office gossip.
Your task is to suppress the very first impulse today. When the urge rises, swallow it. Don't let the blister form, and then begin to literally count the days. Keep a tally in a notebook. See if you can make it 3 days, then a week.
It makes the invisible battle tangible. It brings the war out of the abstract realm of philosophy and grounds it in the physical reality of your Tuesday afternoon.
And as you count those days, chew on this meditative question. What weights, what books, podcasts, theories, or intellectual concepts are you currently showing off to yourself and others while completely neglecting to build the shoulders of your actual functional character?
That is a mirror most of us don't want to look into.
It is brutal, but necessary. Let's move to the fourth stage of our training. As we wage this war against our passions, we inevitably run into a profound tension. We don't live in a vacuum. We live in a world filled with things and people we love.
Right, the attachments.
How do we engage with life? How do we love our families without becoming hopelessly entangled in it?
This is arguably the most difficult aspect of Stoicism for modern audiences to swallow. The line between detachment and apathy is razor thin.
Epictetus addresses this using a profound analogy. And as a quick historical sidebar, this specific analogy was so universally resonant that it was famously borrowed by the 9th century Islamic philosopher Al-Kindi.
The polymath in Baghdad.
Yes, he utilized this exact metaphor from the Enchiridion in his own treatise. It proves that the human struggle with attachment crosses every cultural and religious boundary.
The analogy is the ship and the island. Epictetus asks us to imagine that life is a voyage on a ship, captained by God or fate. Occasionally, the ship anchors at an island.
And the captain allows the passengers to disembark to stretch their legs.
Right, and while you are wandering the island, you're allowed to pick up pretty seashells and bulbs. These represent the earthly goods of life, a comfortable home, a prestigious job, good health, and yes, even our spouses and children.
But the permission to gather these things comes with a terrifying caveat.
A supreme caveat. You must always, at every moment, keep one ear tuned to the ship. Because when the captain finally blows the horn, you must drop everything you have gathered, every seashell, and run back to the ship immediately without looking back.
If you linger, if you weep and refuse to let go, the crew will come ashore, bind you hand and foot, and throw you aboard like livestock.
It is a stark warning that every single relationship we build on this island of mortal life is eventually going to be left behind when the ship departs.
Which is a metaphor for death or the sudden catastrophic commands of fate. And Epictetus does not soften the blow when he applies this logic to human affection. He gives his students this incredibly harsh advice. When giving your wife or child a kiss, repeat to yourself, I am kissing a mortal.
When you first encounter that quote, it feels repulsive. It sounds morbid, bleak, almost psychopathic. Why would you ruin a beautiful, intimate moment of affection by injecting the specter of death into it?
I have to push back hard on this because it feels like a violation of human nature. If I look at my child and in the moment of kissing them goodnight, I force myself to imagine their funeral, I am not being present with them. I am cheapening the love. Epicurus seems far more rational here.
What did Epicurus say?
Epicurus basically said, look, attachments cause anxiety and pain. Therefore, don't have kids. Withdraw to a garden with a few friends and avoid the pain. Doesn't the Stoic demand to kiss a mortal just create a state of constant paralyzing anxiety?
That is the most common critique, but it fundamentally misunderstands the mechanism Epictetus is employing. Epictetus actually fought vehemently against the Epicurean urge to withdraw. He argued that we are fundamentally social creatures, born to love, born to marry. To withdraw is a coward's way out.
But we must love them without being destroyed by them.
We must love the things of the world in accordance with reality, meaning loving them as transient gifts, not as permanent possessions. The pain of loss is inevitable, but the suffering, the psychological destruction that ruins the rest of your life comes from the collision between reality and your delusion of ownership.
So if you deceive yourself into believing they are immortal, you are building your psychological foundation on a lie.
Yes. When tragedy strikes, you will not just grieve, you will shatter. By reminding yourself that you are kissing a mortal, you are stripping away the illusion of ownership. And counterintuitively, this allows you to love them more intensely in the present moment because you are acutely aware of how fragile and fleeting their existence is.
You don't take a single second for granted. That reframes it completely. It isn't about loving less. It is about loving without clinging.
Exactly.
To summarize the core principle, love the people and the things in your life deeply, but always with the acute awareness that they are on loan from the universe. Suffering is caused by the irrational demand for permanence in a deeply impermanent world.
And if we look at the Desert Fathers, this concept of being a stranger or a sojourner in the world is the beating heart of the ascetic life. The monks didn't hate the world because it was evil. They recognized that it was temporary.
They physically embodied the truth of the ship and the island. A monk left the city to live every single day with the visceral awareness that this world is just a way station. They stripped themselves of earthly possessions so they wouldn't be weighed down by heavy pockets full of seashells when the captain called their name.
Epictetus teaches that we should hand over everything to fortune and the deity. If your child dies, he says you shouldn't say, I have lost it, but rather, I have returned it.
And Christian asceticism mirrors this absolute surrender. The voluntary stripping away of worldly attachments isn't a tragic loss of pleasure, but a deliberate pathway to absolute reliance on God. You purify the affections so that you love the Creator supremely rather than clinging to created things which must turn to dust. So, listener, your exercise in practicing detachment today is an exercise in radical presence. The next time you are enjoying a simple pleasure, maybe it's an excellent cup of coffee, or the next time you are sharing a quiet moment with someone you love deeply, take a micropause.
Look at the situation and silently remind yourself, I am holding a fragile vessel. This is a temporary, unmerited gift.
Practice mentally letting go of it before it is taken from you physically.
It unlocks a wellspring of profound gratitude.
And your meditative question for this stage of the training. If the ship's captain sounded the horn right now, today, this very minute, what seashells would you frantically, desperately struggle to leave behind?
Identifying those attachments tells you exactly where your fortress walls are the weakest.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the final section of our deep dive. The crucible of providence, or the alchemy of transforming suffering. We have built the walls, guarded the gates, fought the habits, and practiced detachment. But what happens when the theoretical becomes terrifyingly real?
When the worst actually comes to pass.
When catastrophic illness, sudden exile, or financial ruin kick down the door of your life? How do we handle the ultimate test of the fortress?
For Epictetus, endurance is the bare minimum. Surviving the blow isn't enough. The fully actualized human must learn how to transmute the suffering into glory. You don't just weather the storm, you harness the lightning.
But to understand how this is even possible, we have to look at his theology. He is not a nihilist. He is not an atheist.
He operates on the absolute conviction that the universe is governed by a rational, purposeful, and ultimately benevolent divine intelligence.
Providence. And because he holds that conviction, his logic dictates a radical conclusion. God has not merely given us trials and tragedies, he has also equipped us with the internal faculties required to bear them.
The trial is the scabbard. Our rational will is the sword, forged and fitted perfectly to that specific scabbard. To complain about the trial is to insult the blacksmith who made the sword.
There's a story in the text that perfectly encapsulates this mindset. The story of Agrippinus. It's one of the most stunning examples of psychological invulnerability.
Oh, I love this story.
Agrippinus was a Roman statesman, refused to compromise his morals for the emperor. One morning, he is preparing his daily routine. A messenger arrives breathless from Rome with news. Emperor Nero has just condemned Agrippinus to exile.
And we need to pause and recognize the terror of that sentence. For a Roman aristocrat, exile was a catastrophic loss of identity. Your estates were seized, wealth confiscated, social network obliterated, and you were sent to the edge of the known world, waiting for the assassins. It was social and often literal death.
And how does Agrippinus respond to the destruction of his entire life? Does he weep? Curse the gods. He calmly looks at the messenger and asks, "And my estate in Aricia, what about that?" The messenger replies, "It has not been confiscated." And Agrippinus simply says, "Well then, let us go to my villa in Aricia and have our lunch there."
It is an almost incomprehensible, chilling level of cool. Then why don't we just move our lunch to Aricia? He simply adjusts to the new parameters of reality without a single wasted drop of emotional energy.
It is stunning. And Epictetus pushes it even further. He says that the true philosopher actually welcomes the hardship. He quotes a hypothetical master saying, "He wants me to be sick, well, then so do I." I have to stop here because this sounds like toxic positivity on steroids.
How can anyone want to be ill?
Exactly. How can a rational human being genuinely want to be violently ill or exiled?
It isn't toxic positivity, because toxic positivity is a denial of reality. Everything is fine, ignore the pain. Epictetus isn't ignoring the pain, he is redefining its purpose. He imagines an adversary asking, "What will you make of this terrible illness?" And Epictetus replies, "I will expose its true nature by outdoing myself in calmness. Everything you throw at me I will transform into a blessing."
Because you cannot demonstrate courage without danger.
Exactly. You cannot demonstrate patience without delay. You cannot demonstrate resilience without being crushed. Therefore, if you genuinely want to be virtuous, you must logically desire the raw materials required to forge that virtue. The obstacle is the raw material.
It is the ultimate alchemy. He uses the poison as the medicine. Do not demand that events happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen, and your life will be completely serene.
Ultimate unassailable freedom is found solely through the total, unreserved alignment of your will with the will of providence. If you desire what God desires, if you want what is already happening, you become invincible. You use the unstoppable momentum of the universe to secure your own absolute peace.
And this brings us to our final connection to the Desert Fathers and the Christian ascetic tradition. This idea of transmuting suffering is deeply tied to the joyous, almost baffling acceptance of suffering we see in the lives of the desert saints.
The monks viewed physical illness, persecution, or even what they perceived as demonic attacks, not as senseless tragedies. They viewed them as divine arenas, custom-designed opportunities granted by a loving God to prove their faith, to burn away the dross of their ego, and to participate intimately in the suffering of Christ.
There is a fragment of Epictetus's teachings, famously recorded centuries later by Marcus Aurelius in his private journal, The Meditations. It draws a perfect parallel to this monastic joy. Epictetus says, "You must not say, 'Poor me, because this happened to me.' No, say rather, 'Lucky me, because though this happened to me, I'm still happy, neither broken by present circumstance, nor afraid for the future.'"
Lucky me. It completely echoes the Christian ascetic embrace of the cross. They both refuse the narrative of victimhood. But as we close, we must return to Pascal's distinction regarding the source of this power.
The anchor.
Yes, the Stoic, through immense intellectual training, relies on his inner rational fortitude to look at the fire and say, "Lucky me." The Christian monk, embracing his own weakness, relies on the grace of Christ manifesting within that weakness to bear the cross joyfully.
It is a profound difference in where the anchor is dropped, but the ship rides the same storm. So listener, here's your final practical exercise. The next time something goes definitively wrong today, catch the narrative of victimhood before it fully forms in your mind.
Before you can say, "Why me?"
Exactly. Immediately reframe it out loud. Say to yourself, this is no misfortune, but bearing with it bravely, using it as material to practice patience, is a blessing. Take the raw material of frustration and transmute it into the gold of character.
You step out of the role of the victim and into the role of the alchemist.
And your final meditative question for this deep dive: can you look at your current deepest pain, your most persistent frustration, not as a random accident of a chaotic universe, but as a custom-designed training exercise given to you by a demanding but loving teacher? How does that change the way you undo it today?
It changes pain from a meaningless trauma into a deeply purposeful curriculum. It changes everything.
We have covered immense ground today. Let's look back at the journey. We started with a man dealt one of the most brutal hands imaginable in antiquity. A lame slave, his physical existence owned by a cruel enforcer in a psychotic imperial court. Yet, through this intense, relentless spiritual training, by defining the absolute sanctuary of his will, by vigilantly assaying the impressions at his gates, by engaging in the grueling winter training of his habits, by practicing radical detachment, and ultimately by aligning his will perfectly with providence, Epictetus broke his chains. He became the freest man in the Roman Empire.
He was vastly freer than the emperors who technically ruled the world. He eventually taught emperors like Hadrian. His words guided Marcus Aurelius, and his psychological genius became the structural foundation for Christian monks seeking purity of heart in the silence of the desert centuries later.
I want to remind you that this journey wasn't meant to be a philosophical history lesson. It wasn't about learning ancient Greek terminology to sound smart at a dinner party. It was an invitation to enter the winter training of your own soul. It is a call to stop being a passive, complaining spectator at the festival of life and to start doing the grueling, glorious work of building a character that cannot be broken by the wind.
Because the philosophy is entirely useless if it stays trapped in the text. As Epictetus demanded of his students, "Show us your shoulders, not your weights."
I want to leave you with this final, lingering thought. You spend so much of your finite, precious life trying to alter your circumstances. You spend so much exhausting energy trying to change the people around you, trying to arrange the external world so perfectly that you never have to feel pain or discomfort or rejection. But what if the ultimate shortcut to happiness isn't changing the world at all? What if the universe is exactly as it should be, and the only thing you need to change is the lens through which you view it? You already hold the keys to your own psychological fortress. You hold the keys to your own prison cell. Will you use them today? The walls are waiting to be manned. Stay watchful.